Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week we are joined by former Prime Minister of the U.K, Tony Blair. Remember, we take your questions each episode, so write to politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can. Don't forget to tell us where you're from. And please check out the links to this week's sponsors, Blinkist, ExpressVPN, and HelloFresh in the show notes. We thank you for supporting our sponsors. It really helps make this podcast happen. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Okay, James, two big domestic stories. One, whether the Democrats can get a compromise reconciliation spending bill through Congress. And in Virginia, can Terry McAuliffe stave off a tough challenge from Glenn Youngkin, the former private equity CEO and an on-again, off-again Trumpite? I am cautiously optimistic now about the first. It's not going to be quick. It won't be easy. There are going to be more hurdles and more traumas along the way. But I really think that they are on the right path to enact, a $1.9 trillion bill, which won't be all the liberals' wish list, won't be all my wish list, but it'll be a pretty good measure. It'll be very important if they get it done. I am cautiously optimistic about that, but I am cautiously very worried about Virginia. I'll yield to your expertise on that, but it just looks to me like Terry is almost on the defensive now.
I have the opposite feeling. I mean, I think that Youngkin's, Steve Bannon, that little flirtation with him, and then going around the state with Amanda Chase, who's certifiably nuts. They got a brutal negative up on Youngkin about Charlottesville and the insurrection. It's going to be close. I'm telling you I'm confident, but I would say I feel slightly, like 2% better today than I did 2 days ago. I did some focus groups for the Bulwark. You can watch it on their podcast, the focus groups. And it was all people who had voted for Biden but were not yet voting for Terry. And the anti-Trump, the Trump stuff keeps them away from Youngkin. And the thing that I noticed, and I told the campaign, no one knows. You just thought he'd been governor 4 decades ago or 4 years ago. I mean, I don't remember anything that he did. He was actually quite a productive governor. And maybe they should close with something like that. But the anti-Trump stuff is very effective, and Terry hadn't made any mistakes. I mean, look, it's going to be close and could lose, but there's nothing that upsets me anymore now. I think, if anything, I might be a touch better, a touch more optimistic, but just a touch.
Well, I hope we can all take your optimism. I wouldn't call it optimism, but if I had to bet today, I would bet on Terry. And he's got a good campaign. Everybody tells me his campaign manager is a top hand. And the state party there is probably one of the best state parties in the country. They have all the money. They've raised a bucket load of money. And, it would certainly help if they were able to get this deal home. That would help a good bit. Well, I think it was encouraging this week on the deal front. It's not there yet, and I spent enough time on Capitol Hill to know the way these things work. There'll be optimism on Thursday, and then on Friday it's falling apart. Then it'll be come back together. That's still that path is not finished yet. There's still going to be some of that. I think in the end, the Senate's going to do it. It's going to be less than, as I said earlier, than the progressive wish list. And then I think it'll be up to Nancy Pelosi to somehow charm and strong arm some of the lefties that to say, hey, whatever it is, a 3/4 of a loaf is better than nothing. I think some of their decisions I would question but it's up to where the votes are. I think to only extend the child tax credit for a year or two and to do Medicare expansion to dental or vision and others, I think that's a bad trade-off for political reasons, because I think the Medicare thing is a great issue to run on in 2022, to force Republicans to say, are you going to support expanding Medicare for vision and dental?
That child tax credit, if the Republicans win control of either house in 2022 and they extend it just for a year or two, it ain't going to be extended. And it is already taken millions of kids out of poverty. I wish they were doing more in that. But, as I say, it depends on where the votes are. Things look better than they did a week ago.
So let me do something to help me with this. There's one tranche, and that's the deal that they're working on, that Senator Manchin and Senator Sanders are now working together to try to hammer out. Then there's the bipartisan infrastructure bill, all right, which the bipartisan infrastructure bill is about $1 trillion. So, and I know that the House progressives said they're not going to vote on that first, but if Pelosi can get them to do that, well, if you get $1 trillion there and you get 1.8 trillion in the deal, well, don't you have 2.8 trillion you got?
Well, don't forget about the earlier COVID package, which was what, 1.1 or 1.2. So you're talking $4 trillion.
At a conservative figure, and most of the stuff in the bipartisan infrastructure plan is, I've read about it, seems to be perfectly reasonable stuff that the country needs. The one thing that I think they need to push hard, and they need to get business out front of this, I think this labor shortage is real. I mean, go try to get your car washed. Sometimes you go to a restaurant, it takes a long time. I see restaurants down here that are having to close 1 or 2 days a week because of labor. Well, and a lot of women are leaving the labor force. Well, if you passed that daycare, that stuff, first of all, really improves outcomes for children, and you would free up large segments of your labor force to go back to work. And I don't know why McDonald's and Target or Walmart or God knows what, all these people are not out there coordinating with the White House and telling people why this is not socialism, but this is good for capitalism. It just makes all the sense in the world to me. And I never hear that argument be made.
I agree. I think you're absolutely right. And universal pre-K, which is a companion to that, really. Universal pre-K is state law in Oklahoma and in West Virginia, James. I don't think that's a radical socialist idea. And you need childcare to begin with, and then when kids get to be 3 and 4, they ought to be in school. And that would make a huge difference in getting some women, particularly, back to the workforce.
And there's study after study after study that says that children who go through this, and it's easy to do because you got a control group, people that do and people that don't. The children that go through this do significantly better than the children that don't. You probably save money over a period of time with daycare and universal pre-K. You probably, I don't think an economist would argue with that.
I think it's important to get that done substantively. It will make a big difference in a lot of struggling families. It's also important politically. You talked about the impact it has on Virginia, but the great Ann Selzer just came out with a poll this morning, her Grinnell College poll. Boy, is this country today in a pessimistic mood. 52% say they think the economy's going to get worse over the next year. It's not, but that's what they think today. And they are down on just about everything. Trump versus Biden, 40-40, but 20% say in a country that usually you line up with 95% of the people making up their mind, 20% say, they don't know, they want someone else, things are so bad. But the other thing is they don't have confidence in a lot of things. The Supreme Court, in Ann Selzer's poll for Grinnell College, I think it's 62%. I'm looking for the number right now. Say the Supreme Court makes decisions on politics, not the law. And I'll tell you, if you're up there, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett, might not be a bad idea to take a look at that. But I think people are, by the way, 52%, 52 to 14 say there is a threat to democracy in America. I think they're right about that. But this is a very, very bleak outlook, and I think Congress getting something done, giving people some assistance when it's much needed, I think that might make a difference in that outlook.
Well, first of all, I'd like to know who the 38% that don't think this. You think these guys are going to read a law book and then say, well, this is what the stare decisis is, and this is a case law, and that. No. And I go back to the same thing. It all went back to Bush v. Gore. And when everybody said, well, that's the law, and just go on with your lives, and they've decided, and they looked and they said, we can do whatever we want. And they just have gone about and done whatever they wanted to. They don't give a shit what's in a law book. And the country has got these people figured out and figured out well. The University of Michigan Consumer Confidence number was, I was reading an article by, a well-credentialed economist to say every time the number gets this low, bad things follow. I think I agree with you, and this actually would be sort of good news. I think the economy, some chance the economy is going to improve. And if it does, and it starts beating expectations, then that would be good news for Biden.
Very good news.
If in fact it's better than people think it's going to be. I don't know, and COVID does look like it's getting better. If they get this package through, and these COVID cases continue to decline, then they figure out some things with the supply chain and the labor market, we could be in better shape than people expect.
Well, and that's good. That's far better than meeting expectations in many ways, because they're going to say, man, I thought things were bad and things now are really pretty good. And some credit voters certainly are going to give to Biden. So, yeah, it's a trifecta. But if they get the package through, if COVID continues to decline to the point where we all feel pretty safe going out, and they start vaccinating children, and the economy does what experts like Roger Altman think it might do, that's a very impressive trifecta if they can pull that off politically.
Absolutely. Let's see. But the thing I think that hurt more than anything else is people were really optimistic in late May and early June. I mean, it looked like the virus was, in the rearview mirror. Of course, it was no such thing. Now, to be fair, it was not Biden's fault, but that's just the way it works. And if it continues to decline, it can take some, they're pushing the vaccines pretty hard. And, they good distribution and start vaccinating children. But this whole COVID thing is, I don't know if this nation wants to get better. This has been the most depressing thing I've ever gone through, where you have a pandemic where already lost 750,000 people. And they're still fighting about wearing a mask or getting a vaccination.
Hey, James, before we go, in this segment, I think we want to mention Colin Powell, who passed away this week. By the way, he passed away, he had COVID, but he passed away because he had cancer and Parkinson's and was immunocompromised. So the Tucker Carlsons in the right wing who say, see, it shows that COVID shots don't work is absolute lie and bullshit. It's what you expect of them. Colin Powell was really an extraordinary story, an American story, a kid from the Bronx who when he went into the Army in the late 50s, I guess it was Truman had integrated the armed services 10 or 11 years beforehand, but it was still overwhelmingly white, and all the commanders were white. And he rose in that to become National Security Advisor, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of State. The only tarnish, I think, really on his record was the Iraq War, which he knew was going to cause a problem. But being a team player, he went along, gave that testimony before the United Nations, which ended up deeply flawed. That hurt him. He knew that. And I think that's a real shame. But I remember one time I was interviewing him. This must have been 7 or 8 years ago for Bloomberg Television. It was Memorial Day, and we did it at the Vietnam Veterans, and we were there. And it was unbelievable. Everybody who came by would stop and talk to him, some with tears in their eyes. He was an American icon. He had that one big flaw, but I think history will be kind to Colin Powell.
Yeah, I knew him, not better than an acquaintance and less than a friend, but I'd probably been around him 10 times in my life. And he was a total gentleman. He was totally squared away, and he used to give run into each other on the corporate speaking circuit. And, man, those corporate people, he would give these inspirational can-do speeches, and he was quite good at it. I promise you. You're right. And what he did is he believed the Bush people and repeated what they said. And that Colonel Wilkinson, who was his top aide, was, you could tell he was just livid about it. And you could tell that Powell was livid about it, and remember, in that speech,
he scratched it. He took a lot out. You got to remember.
We went to the CIA to find out what kind of intelligence Cheney and Libby were giving him, and he found that half of it was wrong. But the problem was that the half that he left in also was partially wrong.
Right? No, and it's one thing like you make a mistake and you don't, and you deny it. In his instance, he made a mistake. He knew it, and he felt terrible about it. And you got to give him credit for that.
Well, he was, as I say, an incredible American story. What
did Trump say? Didn't Trump do something totally
everybody
classless?
praised him. Everybody. I mean, Biden and Bush and McConnell and everyone except for Trump. Trump is such a petty, small, insecure egomaniac that Trump trashed him. Said, he got us in a bad war. He wasn't even a rhino. Of course, there was only one reason Trump did that, because he endorsed Hillary and he endorsed Joe Biden.
I mean, you were too easy on Trump, but anyway, we don't have enough words in the English language to describe that.
Yeah. As winter approaches and the year comes to close, there's nothing better than a great book. But if you're like us, James, you want to learn as much as you can, and that's why we recommend Blinkist. Blinkist takes top nonfiction books and gives you the key takeaways in text and audio explainers called Blinks. You can digest them in just 15 minutes. You can use Blinks to tackle procrastination, get started on developing an idea or business, take your projects to the next level, or dive into politics with titles like A Promised Land by Barack Obama and A Short History of Brexit by Kevin O'Rourke. They've blinked thousands of titles in 27 categories. And if you like podcasts, and we know you all do, they've blinked those too with Shortcast. And it's all in one app right in your pocket, so you can learn anytime, anywhere with Blinkist. James, you're a big fan.
It's just, like I said, the damn thing is designed for somebody like me that has ADHD and trying to read 3 books at a time and have trouble concentrating. The thing I would like to know is, how do they do this? I mean, because if you know the work and then you read what they do, you say, well, gee, I wasted a lot of time reading 400 pages when, I could read this in 15 minutes. But however they do it, by an algorithm or they hire people or something, the people that do it are really amazing and quite good at it. I mean, really good at it.
No, they are. And right now, Blinkist has a special offer, James, just for War Room audiences. Go to Blinkist.com/warroom to start your free 7-day trial and get 25% off of a Blinkist premium membership. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/warroom to get 25% off and a 7-day free trial. Blinkist.com/warroom, or look for the link in our show notes. Hey, James, we want to welcome a very distinguished guest from across the pond. Tony Blair was Prime Minister of the U.K. from 1997 to 2007 while leading a resurgence of his Labour Party. He now runs the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and he is a proudly boastful grandfather. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for being with us. You've been very worried about combating terrorism and authoritarianism around the world. When you look at Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, China, Russia, Trump's domination of the Republican Party, you're focused on global change. It seems things sometimes aren't moving in the right direction.
Yes, it's difficult right now because there's a move towards greater authoritarianism. I mean, you see this in China particularly, but also in different parts of the world. And I think for the first time, there's an assault on the idea of democracy as being the best system of government. I mean, I used to go in different parts of the world and have conversations with leaders, and they'd say, look, we're not a democracy now, but that's because we're not at the right stage of development. But in the future, this is where we're going to go. And so just give us a bit of time and space and we'll get there. And that's not the case anymore. You will meet leaders who say, we've looked at your system, doesn't seem to be working very well. So that's a big change, I think, and a dangerous change for us.
And I guess the question is how you combat that. You've thought about that a lot. I would certainly Donald Trump's isolationism, America first, wasn't helpful. Can Biden or can Joe Biden change that? And what else can be done?
The single most important challenge for democracy is efficacy. It's showing it can deliver. So, we often talk about democracy in terms of its values, and those are very important in terms of rule of law, the protection of individual rights, and so on. But in the end, people expect democracy to deliver. So I think President Biden's got an opportunity to do that, but people need to see the thing working. And in many different parts of the world, particularly as politics in the West has become very partisan, very divided, people think it's so divided, it can't get things done. And therefore, especially in a fast-changing world where you need decisions taken and implemented, and they need to be done on the basis of what works and on clear, rational evidence, if people see the system not delivering in terms of their lives, then they say, well, okay, you tell me it's a great system, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything for me.
James, jump in.
Yeah, so Prime Minister, this is one instance in your country where it actually was a democratic decision, and that was Brexit. And by any imagination, of course, I get my news from the Financial Times and the friends that I have in London but by any measure, this thing has not worked very well for the citizens of the United Kingdom. How is there any way to get off of this hamster wheel that you're on? Or are you just stuck with this for the foreseeable future?
Well, Brexit we're really stuck with for the foreseeable future, I think, yes. And that was a decision that was taken. I mean, it's an interesting concept because virtually, all the living former prime ministers are saying, no, this is a really bad idea for the country. The business community on the whole was saying this is a really bad idea for the economy. Most global leaders were saying this is a really bad idea for your country. And people said, yeah, well, that's fine, but we're actually voting for it. So, we are stuck with it, but there's a tendency in the UK to think that having taken the political decision to leave, that's the end of it. But in fact, it's the beginning of it, because we're now dealing with the economic and political consequences of that decision. Now, I happen to think now it's been taken and it's decided, you're going to have to try and make the best of it. And there are things we can do to forge a future for ourselves that's independent, but still strong and successful. But it requires a lot of big decisions. And at the moment, the risk is that people kind of think, well, that was just a political thing. It's been done, and now we just carry on as usual. Well, we can't, because it's a decision that has ruptured. Half of our trade was with the European Union. And we can change our political relationship with Europe. We can't change our geography or our history or our values or our interests. So, this is work in progress for us. I think, and I always used to say to the people that were opposed to President Trump in the US and would say, no, it's much worse in the US. I'd say, yeah, but you can change your president if you don't like it. But having taken this decision of Brexit, that's it for the future generation. And we, by the way, have a very big age divide in British politics today. 2/3 of the over 65s voted for Brexit. 2/3 of the under 35s voted against it. So there's a big generational gap.
Yeah, but the under 35 have to live with it. The over 65 don't have to live with it for very long.
That's what my kids say.
I can't let you go because there's this fascination around the world, but particularly the United States with the royal family. And of course, you were prime minister 10 years, and you had many instances where you had to interact with the Queen. You particularly made famous in the movie about the death of Princess Di. Could you just tell us a little bit about what the Queen is like? Is that protocol is okay? Can you just discuss what she's like in person, or to to deal with? Just some kind of insight into this question?
I know you spend all your time on these great political issues and, geopolitics and global strategies. And actually, you discover in the end what people really want to know is, what's the Queen like?
Yeah, of course. That's what I'm trying to ask the question for our audience.
I mean, I can only tell you what she's like with a prime minister, but, she's she's very gracious. She's always absolutely on top of what's happening in the country. I found her, talking with her, she was always very shrewd about the country. She has a great feel for it. And the first time I met her, when I was prime minister, and I came in to see her, she said to me, well, my first prime minister was Winston Churchill, and that was before you were born. So, you realize you're dealing with a bit of history as well as an individual. But no, she's very beloved of the country, and she, her defining characteristic was really her commitment to duty, actually.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister. I know that our audience is actually, every American's kind of fascinated.
It's awful.
They can't seem to say
it's awful hard to top that question, Mr. Prime Minister. But let me ask you just a couple of things. You led the Labour Party to a tremendous resurgence back in 1997. I think it's easy to say Jeremy Corbyn was a disaster for your party. The new leader says he's moving the party more to the center. Is it working? What's your critique?
Well, he has moved it significantly. I think we turned a corner after our recent party congress. But, the road ahead is still very difficult. And I think progressive, or what we call progressive politics, that's centre-left politics, the world over, faces a substantial challenge. Because if we're not careful, we can end up, and this is what happened to the British Labour Party, we ended up with an economic policy that was old-fashioned and not very attractive, and a cultural message that was new-fashioned and voter-repellent. So if you're going to create today a governing coalition, you've got to have a strong, forward-looking economic message. And you've got to have a cultural message that, whilst it advances progressive causes, takes account of where people are, takes account of common sense, and makes a virtue of being open to dialogue and creating an atmosphere in which people can disagree without feeling, that they're being disrespected or cancelled or treated as, outside of the limits of reasonable conduct. So it's there's a big challenge, and where the liberal or progressive centre-left side has gone to the centre, it's basically still succeeding. I think that's the reason why Schulz succeeded in Germany recently. You've got Macron, who succeeded in France very much from a centrist position. And my view is that the public, even though social media and a lot of the discussion in Western politics is now highly partisan, and the media has become very, very partisan, I still think basically the problem is a supply problem and not a demand problem for what I would call smart center-left politics. It's, if you deliver that type of reasonable proposition, for the future, in a reasonable way, you can still defeat conservatives, but you can't defeat them if you go off on a sort of tangent to the left that leads you to be culturally alien for people, and with this, as I say, this pretty old-fashioned economic message that, in my view, doesn't really work for people in today's world.
Before we go, let me bring you back to your primary focus these days, which is combating terrorism. And you were critical of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, as many others were. So Colin Powell, the celebrated American general and diplomat who passed away this week, you worked with him, you knew him well, you all had a very good relationship. He told Bob Woodward, and I quote, "The Taliban are willing to fight and die for their country. That's why I don't have any problem with us getting out. We can't go from 100,000 troops down to a few hundred and think that'll prevail." Obviously, the outcome there is bad, Mr. Prime Minister. But doesn't that say something? I mean, we can only stay in a place for so long.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I think, look, first of all, by the way, I respect both President Biden and Colin Powell and the people I know, and I was very, very sad to hear the news about Colin. He was an amazing guy and someone I liked very much and enjoyed enormously working with. I just think the way I look at the world, and I've learned a lot in the time since I left office. One of the things that's a bit shocking sometimes is the amount you learn when you get out of that extraordinary pressure cooker of being in the decision-making role, and you get out and you see the world. And so I'm not saying there weren't major mistakes made post 9/11 and so on, but I think what's important to realize is that all over the part of the world that's the Middle East and beyond, and I include Afghanistan in this, there's a big struggle going on in which we have a real interest. And that struggle is within majority Muslim countries. Do they go for what I would call religiously tolerant societies, rule-based economies, where people can grow up in some reasonable stability, where you can develop businesses, or do they turn to a politicization of Islam and turn it into a narrow-minded political ideology, which then tries to govern that society, that economy, and everything that moves within it? And in that battle, and Afghanistan's one part of that, it's very important, I think, we understand our own security is bound up with the triumph or eventual victory, I hope, of the modernizing forces within those societies. So I think you can debate what we could have done in Afghanistan, and I think there were different options we could have pursued. But my more general point is to say that wherever in the world that battle is going on, it's not one in which we don't have an interest. We do have an interest. It's very much in our interest to make sure that those societies are gravitating towards what I would call that more open-minded, that more tolerant, that more respectful of difference view of the world.
James, you want to wrap it up for this fascinating conversation?
I want to wrap it up because I want to talk about in 1992, by a dear friend of mine, and I know he's a dear friend of yours, he tragically passed some years ago, Philip Gould, spent a lot of time in Little Rock. And, and I knew Alistair Campbell. You were gracious enough to even receive me at 10 Downing Street. And, you have such experience and such wisdom. Do you think, how optimistic are you is that this democratic experiment that we've been through in the United States and Western Europe, how fragile is this whole idea right now? Or should I stop worrying about it?
That's a good question, Jimmy. And Philip Gould was a huge fan of yours. And of course, we all watched your campaign back in the day,
right,
thinking this is what we have to emulate. This is the gold standard. But if you'd asked me at any point up to about 5 years ago, if you'd asked me this question, I would have said, look, for God's sake, don't worry. It'll all sort itself out. I'm a little more concerned today. I'm not saying I've gone right over to the other side, but I no longer, when people say to me, I think Western democracy could be seriously disrupted and undermined, I'm no longer dismissive. A few years back, I was pretty dismissive. And I'm not that anymore. And I tell you why. This is my worry. Democracy has a spirit as well as a form. The form is you turn up and you vote. But the spirit is you regard the people whom you're fighting in an election as your opponents and not your enemies. And I reckon there's a large part of Western politics today that looks upon the people that they're opposing in politics as enemies and not as opponents. And once you do that, it's a short step to then delegitimizing them, and then it's an even shorter step to saying they don't deserve to govern, period, no matter what votes they got, because even if they did get the votes, they got it through some trick or fraud or whatever. So I see those elements in a lot of Western democracy today, and that troubles me. I still think, on the whole, I come out more positive, more optimistic than pessimistic, but I'm not in the same place I was a few years ago.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister. And if before any people can see Philip's family, I'd love to, if we could send them a copy of the conversation we had about him.
Well, they would love to speak with you. I'm still very close to them, and a great family, and he would be very proud, by the way, of how well his daughters have done.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much,
terrific,
Prime Minister.
Mr. Prime Minister. This has been a fascinating conversation for our listeners. I wish you well in all of your quest, and particularly grandfatherhood.
Thanks very much, Al. Thanks, Jimmy. It's great speaking with you. All the very best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
With the pandemic still ongoing, few things are more important in our lives than the internet. But it doesn't matter which internet service provider you have, ISPs in the U.S. can legally sell your information to ad companies. And even using incognito mode, your data and searches are getting out there. It doesn't matter how many times you clear your browsing history. Your internet service provider can still see every single website you've ever visited. That's why even when we're at home, you never want to go online without using ExpressVPN. It's an app that reroutes your internet connection through their secure servers so your ISP can't see the sites you visit and keeps your information secure by encrypting 100% of your data with the most powerful encryption available. ExpressVPN is available on all your devices, phones, computers, even smart TVs, so there's no excuse for not using it, right, James?
Yeah, some people out there probably have like Google cannabis near me. All right. or some people,
I'm not going to go on everything they might do, James.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying it could be somebody out there that is Google cannabis near me, or somebody out there might be interested in some things on the internet that you wouldn't want your next door neighbor to know. I'm just saying it's a possibility. James Carville would never do anything like that. But in case you are one of these people, this seems to me like a really valuable product, and everybody is hacking everybody now.
Oh, of course, James. That's right.
Yes,
that's
of
right.
course.
No, we've talked about that a lot. Anyway, most of the time, you don't even realize you have ExpressVPN on. It runs seamlessly in the background, and it's so easy to use. All you have to do is tap one button, and you're protected. Protect your online activity today with a VPN rated #1 by CNET. Visit our exclusive link at expressvpn.com/warroom, and you can get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/warroom. Go to expressvpn.com/warroom or look for the link in our show notes to learn more. All right, James, now for those terrific questions that come from our listeners, and the only bad part of this segment is not being able to get to all of them. But we start with Deb in the historically famous town of Concord, Massachusetts. She said, why wouldn't it be a good idea to take all the health-related proposals out of this Build Back Better bill up on Capitol Hill and put them in a separate bill and challenge the Republicans and some of our corporate Democrats to vote against them directly so their positions are clear? Doesn't such a big bill, which the public doesn't understand, allow the Republicans to just wrap it all in socialism? And why don't we separate these bills? James Carville.
Go ahead. You're much more of a legislative.
Well, no,
guy than
I mean, but you have thoughts on this too. I mean, we both have agreed that it was a mistake to talk about the size of the package rather than the specifics. Deb, you ask a good question. It's hard to take up these bills separately. You have all sorts of procedures you have to get through in both houses. I do think they are, I think right now they're getting to a pretty good place. And I think some of those things they don't get to, though, and picking up on your theme, they can run as great campaign issues in 2022.
Right. Look, I think I'm highly critical. I don't think this thing was sold very well. I don't think it was. I think a lot of this is the press. I mean, Bernie Sanders put it out, and this obsession on the number. The hell with the number, all right? You got the trillion in the relief. If you get the trillion in the bipartisan infrastructure plan, and you get 1.8 trillion. But you make a good point, but they're going to cut some of this stuff out. Well, if you pick up a couple of 3 Senate seats, which is not impossible, and the economy gets better, the COVID gets better, who knows? You pick up 4 or 5 House seats, not impossible. Then you can do, and you can run on popular things that didn't get done that they want to do in the next Congress. There's nothing in this obsession with getting the whole number now, which you're not going to do. You're not doing any good to go attack Senator Manchin or even Senator Sinema for that reason. Is I would leave some of the popular stuff out. If I had to take stuff out, I would take a popular thing out and say we're running on this. But I'm really big on this daycare. I really think that really, really would help people. Would help children, would help parents, would help businesses, would help the future of the country and everything. That pre-care and daycare and pre-K and that kind of stuff is that's more essential than any bridge we're going to build.
And in addition, the child tax credit, which literally, if they extend it for a couple of years, would take, by some estimates, as many as 8 million kids out of poverty. You put those 3 together, those are the essentials. Right. You're right about other things. Listen, we're in our Bay State mode today because Linda in Holden, Massachusetts, says she's worried, actually panicked, about state legislators' efforts to change state laws to transfer authority over state election procedures and results away from independent election officials, either a board or the Secretary of State, and give it to state legislators who can then overturn the election results. Would it be possible to use a ballot referendum in these states to pass laws to prevent this? No, in most of those states, Linda, unfortunately, you can't get a referendum. But boy, your panic and your fear is absolutely justified. Georgia has done it. Other states are moving to do it. It is really as anti-democratic as you can get. It's saying, hey, we're going to have a bunch of elected politicians decide. In Georgia, for instance, they can go and say, you know something, Fulton County, we don't believe that vote. We're going to throw it out. So guess what? Donald Trump carried the state. It is really outrageous. I think you'd like to think it'd be contested in court, but with this Supreme Court, you can't count on it, to put it mildly. I hope if they pass the voting rights bill, they can put a provision there that'll limit it. But, boy, this is a real challenge, Linda. You're absolutely right.
I agree with every word you said. And there's a significant part of this country that just doesn't want to get any better. And they're willing to discard democracy totally to get their way. And you can see that being written in these laws. And in Texas, they're not even very secretive about it. Look, the demographic trends are going to us. We're going to pass as many laws to stay in power as long as we possibly can. And the danger of that is the body politic keeps getting more diverse and more democratic, and you're trying to hold on to power through these anti-democratic means. That's a mixture that could go very poorly down the road, and people need to understand that. Very poorly.
Yeah, it sure can. James West in Athens, Georgia, the home of the #1 Georgia Bulldogs, asked, he said, am I naive or could redistricting not be devastating for Team Blue? I also realize the fix is already in from the 2010 redistricting, so Democrats already are behind the 8 ball. How bad could these gerrymandering redistricting become?
There is a sense that, Illinois, California, places like that, they could really do well. Virginia, of course, when Democrats get into office, they do the responsible thing. They say, hey, let's have a commission. All right, so you get the usual suspects, and they try to draw districts that make geographic sense. And Republicans get in office, they just blatantly, like they did in Texas, they just draw them for nakedly political purposes. And of course, the Supreme Court is totally fine with that. The Supreme Court could give less a shit about anybody's right to vote or be represented in Congress. But there are some people who think it's not going to be as bad as we originally feared.
Yeah. Now, California has a commission too, so you're not going to get any gains there. And Illinois, New York, and Maryland will all set it, but they have more. There are more states: Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, where they control the levers. And I talk to some people say it could be as many as 7 or 8 seats. It depends on the climate next year. If they pass that bill, there is a provision in that Senate bill, the Manchin bill now, that if they can bypass the filibuster, would at least prevent some of this. So, but I think she raises a good point. I think it's worrisome because they are playing games. James, our next question is from Down Under, Andy in Canberra, Australia. He said, surely when and if Trump runs in 2024, the Democrats need to run ads featuring the Donald's own words and images of January the 6th, ending with a tagline along the lines of democracies is on the line, every vote counts. You know, Andy, I wish I were confident you were right. I'm just afraid that some of this stuff just doesn't matter to those people, and that Trump, who I think is the most evil man we've ever seen in American politics, has an ability to divert, demagogue, distract. So I don't know. I would pay attention to those ads. I'm not sure a lot of people that matter in swing states will.
Yeah, but it certainly, would remind people of the awfulness of Trump. But but people, I hear this shit a lot. I don't like Trump personally, but his policies were good. What policy he had that was good? If you're like me and you think that the two most gut-wrenching, awful, god-awful problems that we face today are inequality and climate, here's an utter disaster. The only way that you think you like Trump's policies is that if you don't think inequality is an issue and you don't think climate is an issue. And then, but did you like his appointments? I was reading this article. His cabinet, you can't get over when you stop and do inventory of exactly how scummy and buffonic they were. I mean, you just can't get over it. There was a great piece in, maybe it was in New York or New York Magazine or Atlantic or one of those places, that went through all of his cabinet picks. But these were some of the worst people in the United States. You can't make this up. So, but that drives me nuts when I hear people say, well, I didn't like, and they say, well, the economy was good on him. Actually, the last 2 years of Obama had higher growth and had higher employment than the 2 years before March of 2020. And Democrats just see the fact that, well, they're good on the economy. And Alan Blind, who's a friend of ours, wrote a book. It's not even close. And then, California's all, actually, California grew at 21% the last 5 years. Texas grew at 12%. I mean, so much of this mythological bullshit people go along with. There was nothing about his policies that were good. They were horrible. And his cabinet picks were the worst in the history of maybe, I don't know who. James Buchanan, probably worse.
Well,
so I just can't get over that. I can't get over that shit when people start me on that.
On the economy, the real growth was higher in both some of the Obama years and the last 7 of the Clinton years. The unemployment rate in the last 2 years, Barack Obama came down from 6.5 to 4.5. Trump then inherited that, and it went down from 4.5 to 3.5. To quote Ann Richards on the economy, Trump was born on third base and he thinks he hit a triple. He didn't do that tax cut, didn't do much of a damn thing for the economy. But that's the myth they spread, and that's why it's important they get this bill through, COVID comes down, and the economy starts bouncing back. James.
They spread it because people let them spread it.
Rebecca in Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of my favorite towns. Again, we're in football season. The Wolverines are undefeated. In a late-night campaign stop, JFK gave an impromptu speech on the steps of the Michigan Union in Ann Arbor in which he introduced the idea of the Peace Corps. It was in October of 60. In March of 61, he established the Peace Corps by executive order. By the end of that year, volunteers were serving in 5 countries. For all the talk, Rebecca asked, of getting things done in Washington, well, that is how you do it, James. Why can't Democrats act faster with popular programs?
I don't know. Because we never, and I went through this in the Clinton administration, I go through it now, and I there's no tell me. We always thought, well, this is the best we can do. And, you know, and the 93 economic stuff. It drive me crazy. Well, you know, this is not the greatest thing, but it's better than what we have now. You know, in the Biden stuff, they don't, if you're selling, you got to sell like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And there's just tremendous reluctance again. Everybody in the Democratic Party, every commentator, every staffer, every cabinet member, every columnist, everything wants to say, well, it's just kind of most good and bad. Well, you don't sell shit like that. You sell shit by talking about the only thing about Trump that I remotely give him credit for, of course, he's completely full of shit, you know, but this is the best thing you've ever seen in your life. You know, I mean, how many fraudulent, you know, real estate deals he's in with that. But everybody, to a person, the culture of center-left Washington is, well, it's not great, but at least it's better than what we had. And you just can't sell shit like that.
It's also harder to do some things by executive order than it was back in JFK's time. But that's it's a really good question. John in Sea Ranch, California. This is one for me, James. It says newspapers and magazines are being destroyed on purpose by hedge funds and is collateral damage by social media. Why can't Congress require Google and Facebook, et cetera, to pay a penny apiece for every article or opinion piece that is read on their platforms? John, I think that's an interesting idea. I hope they pursue it up there. These awful vultures, starting with a place called Alden Capital, which now owns, I think it's the second largest newspaper chain in America. And there's a great piece in The Atlantic by McKay Coppins of what they did to the Chicago Tribune. They come in and they buy a place and then they strip it. They move the offices, they reduce the staff, they increase the price short terms to increase their cash flow, and then they sell the real estate, and the newspaper either dies or becomes a shadow of its former self. And you're right. I think Google, Facebook, and some of the others bear some responsibility here, and they ought to be levied. There ought to be some kind of a levy, and it ought to go to help newspapers. I think, frankly, the business model isn't very good in a lot of places, and we're not going to save many. But local news, the demise of local news is one of the contributing factors to the problems with democracy in America.
I see it. Wait, you really get it. I mean, let's just say you're in, I don't know, okay, you're in Baton Rouge, all right?
Right.
So, yes, they will cover the state legislature, and they'll cover the mayor and something like that. But what they used to do that they no longer do is the Ascension Parish School Board meeting, or, you know, the airport commission or the sewage and water district. I mean, there's no coverage of that.
Right.
And human nature is, if nobody's watching, you know, unsurprisingly, you're gonna have more corruption, more graft, you have more everything. And, you know, some of these, like ProPublica, I think they're pretty good, you know, but there's a limit to what they can do. And I don't know how you're going to get this kind of, you know, coverage back. I suspect even a, you know, paper like the Washington Post it has trouble in their metro covering, you know, Prince George's County like they could. But I just think that's one of the downfalls. I mean, people will always be there covering the Congress, but it's a lot of monkey business goes on in this country is at a lower level.
Well, no, it is. I've gone to a bunch of conferences on is investigative reporting dying? No, on a national level, it's not. I mean, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal are as robust as ever. In some cases, they're more aggressive. But what's going on at the local level? Newspapers and places that hold these officials accountable are really dying, and that is a huge problem. You're right. When there's not a spotlight on you, when you don't face accountability or scrutiny, you're much more likely to make bad decisions and corrupt ones.
Boy, I tell you, I think it was up on NPR. I was listening to, they had a report in the Washington Post on these Pandora papers.
Right.
God, the reporting hours that went into that are just stunning. And I mean, the resources that they had to commit they literally like unrang a bell. And you're right. Some of the Times stuff that they have on particularly on the insurrection, I mean that's real. I'm not a journalist, and you've run numerous bureaus, but boy, that takes a lot of resources and a lot of work to put something like that out.
Or look at the stuff the Times did on Trump's taxes. There was 3 or 4 reporters spent well over a year. I remember years ago when the great Dana Priest and others did a piece on Walter Reed and the terrible problems of Walter Reed.
That well.
They took, I think, 7 or 8 months on that story. And just think of how many, and there was a great story, and think of how many lives are better today because of that time. But that takes time, money, and resources. And you're willing to say to a reporter, all right, you go spend a lot of time on a story, and you know something? Every now and then that reporter's going to come back and say, hey, sorry, it doesn't hunt. It doesn't materialize. Right. And if you're a paper with some resources, you can do that. If you're a small paper without any resources, you can ill afford that.
Right, and it looks like to me, and you would know this better than I, is that journalism has become like everything else in the country. The rich are getting richer, and the rest are not doing very well.
No, that's true. It's true. And but I kind of like the idea of slapping, having Google and Facebook pay a penny a piece or whatever it is. I haven't looked at the efficacy of it to newspapers when they use their stuff. I mean, they're freeloaders. James, Derek in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I've been there. That's really it's a nice place. People think of the west and east coast of Canada, but the country it's beautiful country. But Derek asks, given the intransigence of Sinema and Manchin, I'm wondering why Biden hadn't focused on turning a couple moderate Republican senators close to retirement to support his plan. He could offer them ambassador postings or some other plum jobs, effectively freezing out the 2 Democrats. That's what LBJ would have done, right?
Yeah, it's different now.
It is.
I mean, and they want to, when they retire, they want to open a lobbying shop. I got to tell you, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, he speaks out a pretty good bit. He said, I'm not for Trump in 2024. And that takes some modicum of courage to have.
He voted for impeachment, didn't he, James?
He did.
Yeah.
He did, like twice.
He's an honest conservative.
Apparently, he is. And
it's in contrast to the buffoon you have as the other U.S. senator in Louisiana.
And that guy's got a resume that you wouldn't believe.
We're talking about John Kennedy, right?
Yes. He's a smart guy who's acting like a buffoon. I think Senator Cassidy is a conscientious person who's acting like he has a conscience.
Yeah. No, you're right. But Derek, unfortunately, I think your plan wouldn't work. I don't know if LBJ could have done it or not back in 1966 or 65. But first of all, your premise is a couple moderate Republican senators. Who are the moderate Republican senators? That's the problem number one. And problem number two, as James said, when they retire, they want to get rich. Hey, keep those questions coming in because they are really good. I apologize for not getting to more. We'll try to do it next week. And again, you're being great telling us where you're from. Now we want to tell you about a delicious meal service that's been the star of our kitchens this year, HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, eating healthier has never been easier or tasted better. HelloFresh offers 50 menu and market items to choose from every week, from vegetarian and the calorie smart to extra special gourmet options. And since we all know fall is for family time, you can enjoy recipes like meatloaf a la mom and one-pot broccoli mac and cheese that make weeknight meals go off without a hitch, saving you time so you can get back to what matters. With options like quick and easy meals, low prep, one pan, and 10 to 15 minute meals, there's less time cooking and cleaning up and more time you can give back to your family yourself. HelloFresh also gives you the flexibility you need to easily customize your orders on the app within minutes, and it travels from the farm right to your front door in less than a week. You can change your delivery day, food choices, and plan size and skip a week whenever you need to. So forget trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit, and that's why James Carville loves it. Eat better with HelloFresh today. Go to HelloFresh.com/warroom14 and use code WarRoom14. That's all one word for up to 14 free meals, including free shipping. For America's #1 meal kit, remember, go to HelloFresh.com/warroom14 and use code WarRoom14 for up to 14 free meals, including free shipping. We also include the link in our show notes. All right, now for the outrage of the week. You know, James, we've talked about a lot of bad politicians on Capitol Hill, Jim Jordan, Elise Stefanik, Ted Cruz, and some of the worst governors, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, Kristi Noem. But, you know, college basketball season is to me what college football is to you. So I want to start. When I want to pick a Final Four bracket, this of office holders we've neglected, the stupidest lieutenant governors. And from the West bracket, we have Dan Patrick of Texas. He's the lieutenant governor who said last year it was so important to open the economy that some old people have to die. He's talking about us, James. And then there was Janet McGeehan of Idaho, a state with one of the 2 lowest vaccination rates and whose ICUs were at capacity as the COVID virus raged. And when the governor left the state, what did she do? She issued an executive order for banning schools and universities from vaccine or testing requirements. Now, in our Final Four Lieutenant Governor stupid bracket, from the East you have Will Asenall, I think that's the way you pronounce it, in Alabama, who said his state is known for love of God, love of country, love of football, and love of Donald Trump. I think God and maybe Nick Saban want a recount. Then he said Joe Biden should be impeached. Biden. But the top seed and the stupid lieutenant governors across America got there with this observation, and I quote, "The Black Panther was created by an agnostic Jew and put to film by a satanic Marxist and was only created to pull the shekels out of your Shavartzi pockets." That was North Carolina's Mark Robinson. So, okay, you War Room listeners, cast your ballots for the stupid lieutenant governor of the year. Go ahead, James.
All right. Well, last week I said this will never be topped. It's impossible to top this, where a Virginia candidate, Republican candidate for the state legislature, said the way you deal with the rise in sea level, you just take all the boats out of the water. And then he came up with the intellectually persuasive argument that, look, when you get in the bathtub, you know, the water level rises. So to deny his thing is to deny science. I thought, I'll never find anything more stupid than this, but I've topped it this week. Joy Pullman, executive editor of The Federalist, wrote a column arguing that Christians should not treat the possibility of dying from COVID as a bad thing. Running the headline, "For Christians, dying from COVID is a good thing." Now, I never, ever thought that we would be arguing whether dying was a good thing or a bad thing. And they're so crazy that they say, Dennis Prager, who's a, typical right-wing talk show jerk, said he tried to get it because he wanted to have it because the immunity was better. Forget that. If that turned out and you were lucky enough to do that, how many other people would you? It's so stupid. But I always thought that at least we could come together on common ground. That you should try to live as long as you can. But nope, that's not it. There is a divide. There's a pro-death Federalist
magazine or whatever they are. There's me. I mean, I'm definitely not in that camp. I don't see much room for compromise there. It's unbelievable how crazy these people are. I dare anybody to top that.
Well, the Texas lieutenant governor was in the vanguard a year ago when he said old people got to die in order to bring the economy back. So they are nuts. No question. Okay.
They would say they should be honored to do it.
Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Following this episode, we would really appreciate it if you'd check out the links to our sponsors, Blinkist, ExpressVPN, and HelloFresh in the show notes. We deeply thank you for supporting them. When you do, it helps make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.